Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We have a very special show planned for you today. First, we're taking a look at some of the instances where language bans have come up on both sides of the culture war. And here with us to discuss is Associate Editor at Reason, Liz Wolfe. Welcome back, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so first up, last week, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and the University of Southern California School of Social Work have taken initial steps to ban the words field and fieldwork on official documents because of its supposed racist implications and links to slavery. Instead, the groups are pushing the use of the term practicum.
And while Republicans would typically take this opportunity to slam the left for the blatant virtue signaling, it seems that they're playing the very same type of censorship game. Arkansas Republican Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders says she will prohibit the use of the term Latinx in government documents through an executive order, saying that, quote, ethnically sensitive and pejorative language has no place in official government documents or government employee titles. Liz, language banning in general, not my favorite thing, but what do you make of this?
Well, the Sarah Huckabee Sanders story combines some of my absolute least favorite things, like PC craziness, the word Latinx, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the state of Arkansas. It literally has everything possible to make me absolutely hate it. But I think it's important to recognize that this is a perfectly crafted headline for Fox News, right? That's why Sarah Huckabee Sanders did this. I mean, she is now, the executive in charge of Arkansas. Arkansas is still a place that has the death penalty on the books. Obviously not something that she's going to prioritize fixing, but my God, in terms of the things you could do via executive order early in office, I don't know. I can think of a lot of things that might be higher priorities than, making a policy to ban the word Latinx on forms. I do think it's worth sort of recognizing that, I don't think Latinx was on a ton of Arkansas government forms in the first place. And B, it's not necessarily really a ban so much as it is they're the government. They get to choose what words go on the documents. It could just be a policy shift. That's sort of how I would phrase it. But obviously, they're aiming for maximum reaction, especially from the Fox News clientele. So, of course, they're banning Latinx and really owning the libs. And it's just my God, why are we focusing on this?
Right. Latinx being a term, very few people have embraced. We've talked about study after study or poll after poll showing that the community that's supposed to be described by it prefer the actual terms, not Latinx. I was surprised how readily it's been, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, readily embraced by other TV networks that seem to like it. I hear a lot of Latinx on MSNBC, for example. But like you, I don't really care what is on the government form.
Isn't this what's so pernicious about this? Because, Liz, you say it's not a ban. And if it were just the case that the government decides with its own materials not to use the word, again, I agree with you that it is a weird thing to prioritize, even as much as I personally, think that, people who made a lot of Latinx were being silly in the other direction, and now in this direction, it seems silly to make such a mountain out of a molehill. But they are choosing to use the word ban, and the implication here is that if some random person wanted to fill out a form and describe themselves as Latinx, whatever you and I might think of it, that they might be prohibited from doing so. Does that strike you as the kind of state-sponsored overreach and explicit censorship of speech that should be a real concern for a lot of Republicans who have really taken up this mantle of free speech absolutism and used it to frame a lot of their substantive politics?
Yeah, I think it is really concerning. I think the reason why they're using the word ban, to be clear, is to get that Fox News headline, right? That's what they want. That's what they're going after. And in terms of I sort of look at the decision to not use the term field at different colleges in the same way, where it's all of these institutions can make these decisions for themselves. It is obviously a different level of scrutiny that we should apply to it when it's a government doing it, or when it's a public university doing it versus a private. These are all different levels of scrutiny that we ought to apply. But I think fundamentally at the end of the day, the question that I want answered that no reporters are answering is how many Arkansas government forms use Latinx in the first place versus Latino, Latina. I mean, just show me the forms, show me what they look like. But this really does seem like a virtue signaling, posturing sort of attempt to generate a news cycle. And I'm pretty annoyed by that because I think the people of Arkansas probably have bigger problems than this.
Why can't everyone just identify as an American?
Okay, Robbie.
No, we glossed right
Patriot.
over the field work one though, which I think sounds pretty stupid because I don't think the origin of it's like doing work in the field, right? I actually don't think that has anything to do with slavery, which is what they're suggesting.
Right, like the only fields that exist in the world are
farmers
slave
do work
plantations.
in the field, like cornfields that don't have a history of association with slavery.
Yeah, fields predate slavery, and I think
a lot of
academic
fields out there.
also probably predate. I mean, I can't make such broad claims, but that does also seem like one of these ridiculous overreaches. But that's what's so funny. Like, academia has driven a lot of this in the first instance. So there's something unsurprising about a college campus doing this thing that college campuses do. And, we can be critical of it. I'm sure a lot of people on college campuses will be critical of it. One thing that drives me crazy about this college campus discourse is that it pretends that most of the people who are at these institutions don't feel the same way that the rest of the American public is. It really is the professional elite to staff the university who are making these kind of decisions, not students in the broader community. But yeah, it's obviously ridiculous. I don't know. More ridiculous on some level, I think, though, is how much attention this generates. In the news cycle, to your point, Liz, it seems as though Sarah Huckabee Sanders knows that she can draw attention to herself and perhaps score easy political points by doing something like this. And is everybody being underserved by this? People who Sarah Huckabee Sanders represents, people on the right and the left, are we all being kind of made fools of by being forced to focus on these kind of issues as opposed to substantive politics?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing that I keep coming back to is whose life is materially improved when we decide not to use the term master bedroom in a real estate listing or to use the term field at a university. Are poor people's lives actually improved? Are people who did descend from slaves, who perhaps have had, been the recipients of terrible injustice in the Jim Crow South, and are now poor as a result of really, struggling to build up generational wealth for very understandable reasons because they've been cut down by the government and by racism. Are these people's lives improved by us not using the word master bedroom or by not using the word, going into the field in an academic context? To me, this really feels like we have decided as a culture, as a political culture, to go after the easiest possible thing in order to feel this sense of moral righteousness or superiority. And that strikes me as incredibly privileged, incredibly stupid, incredibly wasteful, and a means of sort of making ourselves feel good. I think especially there's a segment of the left, I don't think the entire left is like this, but I think there is a segment of the left that legitimately sees this as sort of a new religion and sees this wokeism as something that is important for them to take part in. And I just sort of wonder, why are we doing this when it comes at the cost of actually pursuing policies that would help these people?
Well, I think you just answered. I think you just answered your own question. Yeah. I think that it is a class issue. It is an elitism issue where people who are ostensibly on the broad left, who are liberals, but who are very elite, choose to focus on issues like this and renaming things that nobody wants to be renamed instead of focusing on substantive material politics that would benefit people across the political spectrum. And on the right, obviously, there's an emphasis on these things for the exact same reason. Elites on both sides are hoping that we all fight and tear each other's hair out over these kinds of things and not notice when there are substantial cuts to Social Security or other kinds of programs or endless funding for wars and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and conservatives are frustrated. They don't like wokeness. I don't like a lot of it as well, but there often isn't a satisfying policy answer to it. It's cultural. And so I think Republicans have struggled to come up with what feels like policy responses to these things.
Well, I think the answer is to ignore it, right?
And
isn't the point that this is outside of the realm of the political? Why do we need legislation telling people what they can and cannot say or how they can and cannot fill out their forms?
I think the really interesting thing about this in terms of how substantive and how connected to real world policy it is will be the fact that Ron DeSantis has very much sort of postured as this. He's tried to make a name for himself precisely by linking sort of parents' discomfort with different components of school curriculum, which is a valid area of inquiry and a valid thing that I think, people have. There's a lot at stake there. But he's found a way to tie that to this idea that he is this single man who is, trying to slap down the wokeness as it infects the brains of the Floridian children or whatever. And he's trying to see whether that will be a popular message, a popular selling point on the national stage. And I think, it's really interesting to see whether that approach is actually going to work or whether people are going to sort of see right through it and see the degree to which he's trying to act like there's some intense real world harm being done by, sort of an exaggerated sense of the wokeness that's infecting Florida's public schools. Like, I think DeSantis is sort of the person who's really bringing this to the national stage. And, people like Sarah Huckabee Sanders are probably going to try to copy him if it's a winning strategy. It's sort of a race to the bottom, in my opinion.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.